He was Rome's greatest general, a man who rose from a troubled youth to become dictator for life. But on the morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, Julius Caesar walked into the Senate and never walked out. He was stabbed 23 times by men he once called friends. This is not just a story about power. It's a story about betrayal, politics, and the day democracy bled out on the Senate floor. Julius Caesar was born in 100 BCE into a noble Roman family, but his early life was far from easy. His family name carried weight, but they lacked wealth or influence. When Caesar was just 16, his father died, and he suddenly became the head of the household. Rome at that time was chaotic, filled with political violence, shifting alliances, and civil wars. But young Caesar was sharp. He watched, listened, and learned how power worked in the Roman Republic. Even as a teenager, Caesar stood out. He was confident, persuasive, and ambitious. He married into powerful families and built connections with Rome's most influential men. But his early political choices put him in danger. When a rival dictator took control of Rome, Caesar refused to give up his position and fled the city. For years, he lived on the run, narrowly avoiding death. When he returned, Caesar carefully rebuilt his reputation. He rose through the political ranks, serving in government roles, winning the hearts of the people with generous reforms and dazzling crowds with his speeches. But it was on the battlefield that Caesar truly shined. By 49 BCE, Caesar had conquered Gaul, modern-day France, and parts of Belgium. His victories made him incredibly popular with the Roman people and incredibly rich. But his growing fame made the Senate nervous, especially his old ally, Pompey, who had become his rival. When the Senate ordered Caesar to disband his army, he made a fateful decision. He crossed the Rubicon River with his legions, declaring war on the Roman government. There was no turning back. Caesar won the civil war and returned to Rome not just as a general, but as a master of the Republic. The Senate made him dictator for life. He gave land to his soldiers, reformed the calendar, and passed new laws to help the poor. Some called him a hero, others called him a tyrant. The line between leader and king was starting to blur, and in a republic that hated kings, that was dangerous. By 44 BCE, Julius Caesar was at the height of his power. He had crushed his enemies in a bloody civil war, returned to Rome a hero, and been declared dictator for life. To the common people, he was a savior. To the Senate, he was becoming something far more dangerous, a king. Caesar wore a purple robe, the color of Roman royalty, and a golden laurel crown. Statues were raised in his honor. Coins bore his face, something no living Roman had done before. He even sat in a golden chair during Senate meetings. These weren't just signs of power. They were warnings to the old guard. The Roman Republic had always feared kings. Their ancestors had overthrown one centuries ago, swearing never to be ruled by a single man again. But Caesar seemed to be breaking that sacred rule. Whispers filled the Senate chambers. Was he planning to become emperor? Would he make Rome a monarchy? A group of senators, calling themselves the Liberators, decided something had to be done. At the center of this group was Gaius Cassius Longinus, clever, bitter, and jealous of Caesar's power. Cassius hated how Caesar had stripped the Senate of its authority. He wanted to restore the Republic. But Cassius needed someone the people respected, someone Caesar trusted. That person was Marcus Junius Brutus. Brutus was more than a senator. He was like a son to Caesar. Some said Caesar may have even been his real father. Brutus had fought alongside Caesarus in the Civil War, and Caesar had spared his life more than once. But Brutus also believed in the Republic more than any friendship. To him, Rome came first. Cassius played on Brutus's loyalty to Rome. He convinced him that Caesar's death was not murder, it was a sacrifice for freedom. One by one, more senators joined the conspiracy. They made a pact. Caesar must die before he could crown himself king. The date was set, March 15th, the Ides of March. And the place? The Theater of Pompey, where the Senate would meet one final time. The morning of March 15th, 44 BCE, began like any other. But for Julius Caesar, it would be his last. The date, the Ides of March, was already considered unlucky by Romans. A few days earlier, a soothsayer had warned him, "Beware the Ides of March." Caesar laughed it off. That morning, Caesar was slow to leave his house. His wife Calpurnia had terrible dreams of blood and death. She begged him to stay home. At first, Caesar agreed, but then one of the conspirators, Decimus Brutus, arrived at his door. He told Caesar the Senate was waiting, and that people would think he was weak if he didn't show up. Reluctantly, Caesar dressed and left. As he made his way through the streets of Rome, he was calm, unaware of the trap waiting for him. Dozens of senators had gathered at the Theater of Pompey, pretending it was just another meeting. They had hidden daggers in their robes. Each man had one mission: strike the dictator down. Caesar entered the Senate hall, surrounded by friends and enemies alike. He took his seat, unaware that the circle was closing in. Suddenly, one senator approached him with a petition. It was a distraction. Another grabbed Caesar's toga and pulled it down. Then came the first stab. Chaos erupted. More than 60 senators lunged forward, blades in hand. They stabbed again and again. 23 times in total. Caesar struggled, stunned by the betrayal. When he saw Brutus among them, he is said to have whispered, "Et tu, Brute? You too, Brutus?" Then he stopped resisting. Julius Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, the very man he had once defeated. The Senate chamber fell silent. The greatest man in Rome was dead. The conspirators, covered in blood, walked into the streets expecting cheers. Instead, they found silence, fear, and confusion. They had killed a tyrant, but also the people's hero. The republic they tried to save was now at a crossroads. The death of Julius Caesar sent shockwaves throughout Rome. His assassination wasn't just a murder. It was the moment that tore the republic apart. The conspirators, believing they had saved Rome from tyranny, were immediately met with a stark reality. Instead of the triumph they expected, Caesar's death sparked chaos. The Senate, now leaderless, was thrown into disarray. The people of Rome were devastated. Julius Caesar had been their hero, the man who promised them land, food, and reforms. His murder made no sense to them. Some saw the conspirators as saviors, but most believed they were nothing more than traitors. The common people were furious, and soon, the streets were filled with mournful cries. The day after the assassination, Caesar's adopted son, Gaius Octavius, who would later be known as Augustus, was in a state of shock. He had just heard about the death of his father figure. Octavius was young, only 18 years old, but he was determined to honor his adoptive father's legacy. He quickly returned to Rome and began to gather support from Caesar's loyal followers. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, Caesar's right-hand man and consul of Rome, was left to pick up the pieces. Initially, Antony was furious about the murder. He was close to Caesar, and Caesar's death was a personal blow. But he also understood the political game. He knew the conspirators were powerful, but so was Caesar's influence. Antony, alongside Octavius, would work to avenge Caesar and turn the tables on the assassins. The conspirators thought they had rid Rome of a tyrant, but what they had really done was light a fuse that would soon erupt into war. Caesar's death didn't bring peace. It brought bloodshed. The Republic was slipping away, and the idea of a Roman Empire was starting to take shape. In the days following Caesar's death, a funeral was held, and the people gathered to mourn their fallen leader. Antony gave a speech, one that would become legendary. He showed the Roman people Caesar's bloodied toga, stirring emotions and fanning the flames of rebellion. The conspirators, now surrounded by growing hatred, began to realize the true consequences of their actions. The Republic had been shattered beyond repair. The death of Julius Caesar was only the beginning of a new conflict in Rome. While the conspirators thought they had ended Caesar's rule, they had unknowingly opened the door to even greater turmoil. The power vacuum left in Caesar's absence was quickly filled with rivalries, betrayal, and ambition. As Caesar's adopted son Octavian returned to Rome, he found a city in chaos. Though he was young, Octavian was clever and had the charisma to win over Caesar's loyalists. He knew he had to act fast. Mark Antony, who had been Caesar's trusted ally, was also determined to claim power. The two men had the same goal, control of Rome, but their methods were different. Octavian, seeing the growing unrest, sought a political solution. He offered his allegiance to the Senate, promising to uphold the ideals of the Republic. But Octavian knew that his true power lay in the support of the people, and he began to rally them. He also promised to avenge Caesar's murder and punish the conspirators. Meanwhile, Mark Antony, though initially furious over Caesar's assassination, had his own agenda. As consul, he took control of the army and began to push for a strong, centralized government. Antony's plan was to present himself as the protector of Caesar's legacy, but his increasingly authoritarian actions alarmed many of the Senate. Both men, Octavian and Antony, were now locked in a struggle for control, but they were not alone in their quest for power. There were other contenders for leadership. Brutus and Cassius, the masterminds behind Caesar's assassination, were not finished yet. They fled Rome after the murder and raised an army to challenge both Octavian and Antony, believing they had saved the Republic from tyranny. But they were quickly becoming enemies of the people, who began to view them as traitors rather than liberators. Rome was on the edge of civil war. The Senate was divided. The people were confused. But Octavian, despite his youth, was emerging as the strongest contender for leadership. He understood the importance of controlling public opinion, and he used his political acumen to secure powerful alliances. By positioning himself as the rightful heir to Caesar, he was gradually gathering more and more support, preparing for a showdown. As the power struggle between Octavian and Mark Antony escalated, the fate of Rome was hanging in the balance. Both men knew that only one could emerge victorious, and the battle for control would soon move beyond politics into bloody conflict. The two former allies, now bitter rivals, gathered armies and prepared for a series of battles that would determine the future of the Roman world. Octavian's military strategy was to weaken his opponents strategically. He first focused on securing alliances with key generals and influential figures across the empire. One such ally was Marcus Agrippa, a brilliant tactician and trusted supporter of Caesar, who helped Octavian raise a formidable force. Octavian also sought the support of the Roman people, leveraging his status as Caesar's heir to rally the masses behind him. His promise was clear: restore the greatness of Rome and avenge Caesar's death. Mark Antony, on the other hand, controlled a large portion of the Roman East, including Egypt, where he had formed a powerful alliance with Cleopatra. Antony's military strength came from his close ties with the eastern provinces, but his reliance on Cleopatra caused suspicion in Rome. Many feared his ambitions extended beyond Rome's borders and into the east, and this made his position more precarious in the eyes of the Senate and the people. In 42 BCE, the two forces would meet in a decisive battle. The Battle of Philippi became one of the most crucial confrontations in Roman history. The battle was fought on the plains of Macedonia, and the stakes couldn't have been higher. On one side were the forces of Octavian and Antony, and on the other were Brutus and Cassius, the leaders of the assassination plot against Caesar. As the battle raged on, Brutus and Cassius were both defeated. Cassius, overwhelmed by the loss, committed suicide, while Brutus, unable to accept defeat, took his own life as well. The death of these key conspirators marked the end of the Republic's last hopes for survival. The Senate, now stripped of its power, had no choice but to bow to Octavian and Antony. The victory at Philippi solidified Octavian and Antony's control over Rome, but tensions between them remained. It was clear that they would not be able to share power forever. A final showdown between the two was inevitable, but for now, Octavian stood as the undisputed ruler of Rome, and his path to ultimate power was clear. After their victory at the Battle of Philippi, Octavian and Mark Antony ruled the Roman world together, but their uneasy alliance was doomed from the start. The two men had a shared goal: revenge for Caesar's death and the restoration of order, but their ambitions and differences soon tore them apart. Antony, who had been in charge of the eastern provinces, found himself increasingly drawn to the power and allure of Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. The two formed a close political and personal alliance, with Antony even taking Cleopatra as his lover and giving her a significant role in his political plans. However, this alliance raised concerns back in Rome. Antony's growing ties to Egypt and his lavish lifestyle with Cleopatra alarmed many Romans, who saw it as a sign of his desire to extend his power beyond Rome's borders. Octavian, in contrast, capitalized on Antony's relationship with Cleopatra to turn public opinion against him. Octavian used propaganda to portray Antony as a traitor to Rome, accusing him of abandoning his Roman heritage in favor of an Eastern queen. The Senate, which had once supported Antony, now began to shift toward Octavian's side. The people of Rome, too, began to grow suspicious of Antony's ambitions. In 32 BCE, the Senate declared war on Cleopatra and Antony, and the stage was set for a final confrontation. The two sides met at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, a naval battle that would decide the fate of Rome. Antony and Cleopatra's fleet was decisively defeated by Octavian's forces, led by Agrippa. The defeat marked the end of Antony's power and the beginning of Octavian's path to absolute control over Rome. Following the battle, Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Egypt. Facing certain defeat, both chose to take their own lives. Antony, devastated by his loss, fell on his sword, while Cleopatra, who had already been devastated by her loss of power, took her own life by means of a poisonous asp. Octavian returned to Rome as the undisputed ruler of the Roman world. With the death of his rivals, there was no longer anyone left to challenge him. He had won the war for Rome's future, but the Republic, as it had been known, was now gone. Octavian would soon become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome, marking the end of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Roman Empire. With the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE, Octavian emerged as the sole ruler of the Roman world. His victory secured him unrivaled power, but he faced a delicate challenge: how to maintain control over an empire that had been governed for centuries as a republic, where power was supposed to belong to the Senate and the people. Octavian, now known as Augustus, was keenly aware of the need to avoid appearing as a tyrant, a title that had led to the downfall of previous leaders. Instead of declaring himself a king or dictator, he presented himself as the restorer of the republic, even though in practice he held absolute power. Augustus cleverly consolidated his authority through a system of reforms that appeared to uphold the traditional republican institutions, while in reality they solidified his control. He took on the title of princeps, meaning first citizen, which allowed him to present himself as a servant of the people rather than a ruler. He was granted the title of imperator, or supreme military commander, but he also ensured that his control over the military was secured, effectively turning the army into a loyal tool of his rule. Through these carefully crafted political moves, Augustus managed to build a power structure that kept him at the top while maintaining the illusion of a republic. Augustus also carried out widespread reforms throughout the empire. He reorganized the provinces, created a professional civil service, and implemented a tax system that ensured a steady revenue stream for the state. The Roman Empire began to experience a period of stability known as the Pax Romana, or Roman peace, which lasted for over 2 centuries. This period allowed Rome to expand its territories, improve infrastructure, and establish its dominance in the Mediterranean world. However, the legacy of Julius Caesar was forever intertwined with Augustus's rise. While Caesar's assassination marked the violent end of the Roman Republic, Augustus's reign signal the birth of the Roman Empire. The assassination that had been intended to restore the Republic ultimately led to its downfall, with Augustus becoming the first of many emperors to rule over the vast and powerful Roman Empire. Tragic events that unfolded on the Ides of March, 44 BCE. It's clear that Julius Caesar's death was not just the loss of a powerful leader, it was the turning point in history. His assassination, carried out by those closest to him, did not save the Roman Republic. Instead, it set in motion the rise of a new era, one that would forever change the course of history. The murder that day had far-reaching consequences. It sparked a struggle for power that ended with Augustus, Caesar's adopted heir, becoming Rome's first emperor. This marked the end of the Republic and the beginning of the Roman Empire, which would dominate the Western world for centuries. While Caesar's killers thought they were saving Rome from dictatorship, they inadvertently paved the way for an even stronger and more centralized form of rule. Rome would never return to its old ways. The transformation was complete. The empire that Augustus built would last for over 5 centuries, influencing governments, culture, and the world's political structures long after the fall of Rome. Julius Caesar's legacy, his genius, his ambition, and the betrayal that led to his death remains one of the most significant moments in world history. The murder of Caesar didn't just change Rome, it reshaped the entire Western world, and his story continues to be told, as his rise and fall remain a powerful reminder of how fragile power can be and how quickly history can change. Before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories like this. What do you think would have happened if Julius Caesar had lived? Do you think Rome would have been better off with Caesar in charge? Or did Augustus's rule bring about the best for the empire? Share your thoughts below and join the discussion. If you enjoyed this history's most dramatic betrayals, check out our other videos on our playlist.